Welcome to UberCube, the podcast where we discuss all things cube but with refreshments. This is your host, Anthony Adams, aka Uberbear, and I'm joined this evening by my other host.
It's me, a Magic, also
hey,
known
Magic.
as May.
Magic, I got a question for you.
I got an answer for you, possibly.
It's been really bugging me, and I don't know who to ask. What is a travel cube?
Oof, that's a complicated question. It's like a cube, but small. Jokes aside, travel cubes are essentially when you're designing a cube that is extremely space efficient or with the intention of it having minimal amount of pieces while also being good for travel.
All right, so that's a good little overview to what we're going to talk about during this episode. But before we go any further, we're going to do the thing that we always do here at UberCube. May, what are you enjoying during this episode?
Today, I have a quirk that is blackberry sage flavored. I'm just keeping it simple with this one.
I am having the same thing that I had before, and my wife is going to kill me because I'm drinking her Tito's. And I am having
no.
I know she's going to murder me. Yeah. But Tito's with orange juice, a.k.a. screwdriver. Which I'm a big fan of. If I find you in
a ditch, I'll remember you as you were.
Hey, I just recently surpassed 22 years of marriage, and if she hadn't killed me by now...
She hasn't killed you yet.
That means, well, and if anybody can't, if episodes suddenly go dark, someone please reach out to... But anyway, so we've got an interesting episode, as we always say. I always say they're all interesting, because to me they are interesting, but May's got a pretty cool topic that we want to cover here today. And it's May's microcube is going to be the focus point that she's now changed to May's travel cube. I just noticed on the cube cover. Thank you, May, for doing that. And it is a 155 card cube. May, tell us about this design. What are you trying to do here? What's the goals of a travel cube?
Sure. So since we're going to top off the list with my specific travel cube design, the things that I was trying to do with this is that I was essentially taking a cube concept that I was brewing before, and I wanted to make it have everything fit into one container that I can put into my purse. And part of that challenge was trying to figure out ways to minimize the amount of game pieces that were necessary in order to play. So one of the things that is extremely challenging with this type of environment is there aren't any tokens. There are no counters. And more importantly, the amount of lands that I have access to in order to build the deck is very limited because my space is limited.
Yeah, so that's kind
designing
of this for like
itself, 2 players is the key aspect here.
So is it kind of like, is it Jumpstart-esque as far as a design concept? Like,
believe it or not, no. The main way that I end up playing this is that it is a pancake draft, actually, where essentially you have 9 packs of 11, and then you pack 1, pick 1, and then you pack 2, pick 2, burn 2, then pack 2, pick 2, burn 4, I think was what it was. But the concept of this is that I have just enough that I'm able to do a 2-player draft, and it is interesting because the drafting experience between just 2 players compared to how it is with a full pod is a much different experience.
So I was kind of looking at, as May does, and that, I believe you guys talked about it during Lucky Paper's episode, the importance of a TLDR. Really, really good, as May likes to do. Not only that, but your art choice. And I will include within the show links. Her cube golds are presented, her archetypes she does have defined archetypes within this. She's even got key cards that you should look for. Her TLDR is absolutely amazing. You can pretty much get an instructional manual as being the opponent as to what maybe should guide you as the individual sitting across the table playing this. Are you bringing this to CubeCon, May?
It was one of the things that I was considering bringing to CubeCon just because it's a good way to pass some time. But
yeah. Whenever you and I lose, though, this is something we could do in the middle of waiting for the next set, right?
Yeah. The alternative is just playing some Dan, you know?
I've never played Dan. I want to go off on the topic. We're going off the regiment here. What is Dan? I have no idea. What is Dan? I just want to know.
Dan is essentially like a wizard tower type format where you share a deck, and the goal is to get Dan-Dans and then attack into your opponent, and it's a lot of like controlling the library and controlling the Dan-Dans on the board. It's a really fun and interesting format that I think that you would enjoy. It's not like Cube. It is its own thing, but it fits into the topic that we're talking about of it is Magic compressed in a small container. It is something you can fit into a deck box and take it with you and play Magic.
Yeah, I find this so interesting because I like 180 design builds. I have my Munson Cube, which is the Lords of Metal Cube, Eddie Munson from Stranger Things. And then I have the Monopoly Cube that we've talked about on a previous episode that I'm super excited about that also packs. But at the end of the day, I've got a Chester drawer here, and they're both extending the full Chester drawer. It's either the fact that I like to buy boxes that are just entirely too large or whatever, but I can see where this would be really cool in between sets, like at a Legacy match or a Modern match where you could bust out Maze Microcube or Travel Cube designs. Or to correlate this even better, I do know that at CubeCon that Derek Gallen has talked about, he's hosting his bar cube one night at a pub, and I'm already going to take the Dumpster Fire Cube. I feel like this should be something that joins that soiree. And maybe I can encourage Andy Mangold from Lucky Paper Radio to bring out his really cool retro non-sleeve cube as well, too. I think that'd be pretty dope.
I hope so. I want to play that cube. Anthony, if you're listening to this by chance, I want to play that cube. Literally come cube, over, nudge me, and I want to play it.
Andy, everybody wants to play that cube. The cube's really cool, and it's beautiful, the fact those cards are so shredded. It does kind of ties into that, pack and play aspect of what this design that you've made, right? Something that you're not worried about all the accessories quite so much. Just grab and go. I joked before because one of her questions was, what's the idea of it? My response was to travel, or to travel. A travel cube is to travel. I mean, that's kind of in the terms, but it's good for like people like me, all joking aside, because I'm a traveling engineer, right? I get on airplanes and a lot of times I don't want to sit there and get frisked by TSA for 45 minutes while they're unveiling my power cube environment, but I could throw something like this into a small deck box and rock and roll and just go play. And it would fit the same confines of a commander deck almost, right? I mean,
Like, this one fits into a container that holds a little over 200 cards, and the gimmick of that box is the fact that it was about 2 commanders and some tokens worth of space, and I 3D printed, like, this box, and I was like, I want to build a cube, and I want everything in the cube to fit into this box. No other pieces needed.
I like that. I'm looking at TLDR. Again, I'm working on that boomer mode, right? But like we said, 2 players. The cube's meant to be just everything that fits into 200 plus deck box. That's a design aspect, right? That's a restriction. You have to now, your cards have more weight, more value. Your choices have to be very deliberate. As with any like 180 cube environment or anything like that, you now have to be very select in what you put in that environment to signal what you want your players to see. And the one thing that I do like, and I've been listening to, I think the bar cube that Derek Gallen designs this to, absolutely no external game pieces. No tokens, no let me get the dice, counters, whatever. You can probably just play with your cell phone as a life counter, rock and roll, and play this game. Is that accurate?
Yep, that's exactly what I'm looking for. Just bring out a phone, bring out a pencil and paper, whatever you need to do, just track your life. And it is things that are playable, out of the box. But you will be surprised how hard of a restriction it is to not have counters or tokens in it.
Oh, I've never even thought about it, because I may, but now I'm just going to play yours at CubeCon. What's interesting here, too, is what you say a lot of the decks end up being like a hodgepodge of 3 colors. And sometimes with a 4th splashing in, right? Because I was looking at your list, and it's pretty compartmentalized, as it has to be. On average, hang on just a second, your count per color, this is kind of the breakdown of each color section: 16 white, 16 blue, 16 black, 17 red, 15 green, 23 multicolored, 18 colorless, and 34 lands, which are 2 of Guild Gates. And then we've also got some specialty lands like the Ash Barrens and the Black Dragon Gate, stuff like that. But you've given people the access to the mana they need, and that's at a pretty good percentage too. I mean, that's, you're hitting a lot of criteria there. It's more than 11, 12% without pulling up my numbers, but pretty good. I can see where if you're doing 16s, 15s, and 17s as your choices.
Monocolor does not exist in this environment, because even if you drafted one of every color, of every card in that color, you would not have a full deck.
I like though
You
that
would
you've
have to
actually
have so many artifacts or non-colored cards in order to finish a deck that it gets really difficult really fast, so you end up in 2 colors as a baseline.
which is really cool because of that really tight package of 15s and 16s and 17s that you have. A thing there's this ideal archetypes: Cycling Matters, Blink, Delve, Graveyard Affinity, and Graveyard Matters. I appreciate that within that very tightly woven aspect of what you've decided to include, you've actually been able to derive archetypes. It's pretty neat. And you've got some key cards listed on your TLDR. Would you mind taking over a couple of these cards, kind of give some signals? What are your signal cards, May?
Sure. So I'm going to start with the inspiration behind this cube, and the reason that this cube even exists is Hollow One. I don't expect anybody to know this, but there was a time when I was working on a full-length feature cube that I was calling the Hollow One cube. The gimmick of the cube was that it was cycling, graveyard matters, madness, whatever. It was discarding matters for all of the colors in this entire environment. It's not that the cube failed. It is just that as I developed and grew as a curator and that my goals changed, I realized that this wasn't something that I was interested in pursuing, but that concept stuck with me, and I was able to retranslate that into, hey, wait a second. I want to make a travel cube, and I want to make something that's mechanically interesting, diverse, and intricate? No. Something that lets you just make impressive decision-making.
Yeah, so every turn matters, every play matters.
Right.
And I can see that.
And Hollow One is a 5-cost artifact creature for 4/4, and it costs 2 less to cast for each card that you've cycled or discarded this turn. And it has cycling for 2. This card has been like a key part of like modern decks for a long time, because there was a period where there was this sort of Madness Rakdos discard deck that revolved around getting Hollow One out as fast as possible, and then having some other cards that benefit from discarding, and then like some Phoenixes. Point is that I wanted to translate that into a cube because I love that concept. And Hollow One is that backbone of an idea. It is that major signal of this is what the cube represents. I am trying to discard a bunch of cards. I'm trying to cycle a bunch of cards. I'm trying to make cycling matters. I'm trying to make discard matters. I'm trying to make artifacts matter. I am taking every aspect that is on Hollow One and trying to get the most out of it.
Yeah, I see what you're doing there. The next one I'd like to take on is another one of your pillars, one of your benchmarks. It's Mr. Teeth, basically. Dr. Teeth. It's Psychotog. For 1 colorless and Dimir, you get a creature Atog, discard a card from your hand. Psychotog gets +1/+1 till the end of turn. Remove 2 cards in your graveyard from the game. Psychotog gets +1/+1 till the end of turn for a 1/2. This card is awesome. I am in love with this card. I ran this card for a while, believe it or not, in my Powered Vintage Cube, because this card would catch people off guard a lot of times. And it just gave you that discard outlet you wanted for your Reanimator and all these other effects that you wanted to Graveyards Matter synergies. Huge fan of this card. And we'll talk about some more in depth, but the TLDR really signals the intention of this cube. And I do like what you said about Hollow One, how when you made card choices within such a tight package, again, monocolors, and I know Hollow One doesn't qualify, but it was like 15, 16, 17, and a package of 155. Your card choices have to be deliberate, they have to be robust, and the cards need to do something that cross-pollinates with multiple strategies. And Hollow One really touches those points. Psychotog also touches a lot of those points as well, too. And that's what I enjoy about these 2 choices. Would you mind taking on your Blink signpost within this package?
Sure. So one of the things that's particularly interesting is that cycling can be associated with like Astral Drift or Escape Protocol. It is just whenever you cycle, then you either get to flicker or pay a cost in flicker. And I will tell you what their exact effects are in a second. But the overarching idea behind them is that I have some ETB effects that I want to take advantage of. I have a bunch of cycling cards that I'm going to be using or taking advantage of anyways. So when people look at these and they're like, okay, I see a direction that I can go that happens to overlap with that core design that I'm building into already. What is the variant of that I'm trying to make? And Astrodrift is the perfect representation of this because it's 2 and a white enchantment whenever you cycle Astral Drift or you cycle another card while is in play, you may exile target creature. If you do, return that card to the battlefield under its owner's control at the beginning of the next end step. And you can cycle it for 2 and a white. What's really cool about this card is that it's both a flicker outlet by itself of, I have something that I want to take advantage of now. I want to flicker something now. I want to avoid removal now. Or it is that enchantment payoff later when you have your cycling cards. And that deep modality is what's really important with these cycling cards is I need both halves to be relevant at any given point because the card selection is too small for cards not to matter in every deck.
Yeah, so what is really important whenever you're doing such a tight package, such as in May's Travel Cube, is the modality matters, right? And also the ability to cross-pollinate with the other aspects of the cube. You can't really have cards in such a tight... I mean, you can, but you want them to play well with others because splashing, as May stated in her TLDR, is that it's a lot of times it can be a 3-color deck, sometimes splashing 4. A lot of 4-color decks will appear. So you need to have cards that roll over, such as this card that we talk about, Astral Drift, and then Psychotog, and then Hollowed One. And it's important that there's modal aspects or layers within a card so that players can connect the dots with such a small card pool. Because you don't want them to lead them down a path. You don't want to make traps. It's too easy to make traps, and you don't want to present them to them.
Big difference between travel cube design and regular cube design is that regular cube design, you don't have a limit. The limit is what you self-impose. Versus travel cube, you are limited by your space. How much space do I have in order to carry this travel cube? Is this going to fit into a quiver? Not sponsored or anything, just like great
Should
product
be, though.
Anyways.
If Quiver, if you're listening, we would love that.
We would absolutely adore that. Love your products. But is it going to fit into like a Quiver Bolts, or is this going to fit into like a commander box that fits like 2 commanders? Like, how much space are we working with in order to fit this cube? And when you have that tight of a space, you can't afford to have really narrow cards. You need cards that fit multiple roles. You can't just have trying to think of the best way to explain it, like...
Or do something Savannah Lion-esque. Anything vanilla. It like really doesn't play well in this cube. You can call it aggro, but after that, it just kind of... It dirtles out.
Right. There is no room for filler cards. Every card has to overlap with some theme in some way. And it helps when you have a small cube like this where you can kind of narrow in and focus on exactly one theme and then the variations of that theme. This cube cares about discarding. It cares about the modality around discarding. It cares around your decisions around discarding. What's in your hand? What's in your graveyard? What can you play on the field in order to take advantage of all those things?
And I'll tell everybody to reference our Labyrinth of Modal Spells where we do card choices. It's one of the episodes, early ones of late 2022, is when we talked about that one, the importance of having cards that give players choices. And it could be something like a charm or it could be a confluence, but those type of cards play well with those environments where players get 2, 3, 4 choices of a card, even outside of the creature aspects that we talked about with like Hallowed One. It's important that every card has a selection piece. That way, even if they don't need one, they can choose others, like something that says make a treasure. Another one may say discard a card. They may need those aspects to play into their profile they're trying to build in their deck. So, May, carry on. Apologies for the interruption.
Note, because you did mention Savannah Lions not fitting in this environment, and that is the perfect representation of Savannah Lions by itself, vanilla 2/1, who cares? But this cube features a card called Dryad Militant. But Dryad Militant is in Selesnya color, 1 mana cost. It's a Dryad Soldier 2 and 1. If an instant or sorcery would be put into a graveyard from anywhere, exile it instead. This is a perfect hate card because it takes advantage of the matchup. It knows discarding matters, but now all of your instants and sorceries can't stick in the graveyard anymore. This is a good hate piece for that. And it enables that aggressive strategy. So when you are trying to build this white aggro deck or some white variant of this deck, then this is an auto-include. And I also have things like Dragon Hunter, Mardu War Reaper, etc. These cheap aggressive creatures that don't just exists as a vanilla 2 one, but also exists to hate out certain pieces.
Yeah, I like that because you got counters basically. Cycling Burn is another section that you've included in here. Zenith Flare for 2 colorless, you get, and Boros, you get an instant. Zenith Flare deals X damage to any target, and you gain X life, where X is a number of cards with a cycling ability in your graveyard. You've given a payoff to people cycling, and you've given kind of the Psychotog tie-in where you can discard that. I like that. I like what you did there. That kind of really ties in that idea. That card doesn't care that you necessarily cycled it. It just cares that it is cycled.
It just cares it's in the graveyard.
That is very cool. Very cool. Your other grouping, and this kind of ties into that some more, you've got your control discard. Do you want to take over a couple of these cards and explain why you've chosen to add these to your selection?
Cycling Control is one of the major archetypes because it's focused around taking advantage of that modal aspect of some of these cards while also acting as that control hinge. Mirror Shell Crab was a big change that came out with Neon Dynasty at this point.
I love this card. Tell them what it does. This is amazing.
It is a 5 blue artifact and creature crab. It has Ward 3, which is huge, and it's a 5/7. You can also channel it for 2 and a blue by discarding it, counter target spell or ability unless its controller pays 3. This is perfect because not only is it just another cancel effect into this cube, but it's also a big, hard to deal with creature that can be your top end later. It can be a reanimate target. It can be another thing in your graveyard to remove with like Psychotog. It fills a lot of roles while fitting into this, I'm controlling you by discarding my effects.
It really plays into that modality. And I think that's something we can really focus on with the travel cube, with the limited amount of space, the volume that you want to pack and play with, no tokens, no counters. You want cards that do things, and you want your gameplay to matter, and you want to interest your players. So I can see where spoiler season is different for you because you're looking for cards that check a lot of boxes and tie into these concepts.
I'm constantly looking for whatever new cards involve cycling, channel, whatever. Just things that can get things in my graveyard, fit multiple roles, and I can just slot them in.
I'm a huge fan of this other choice you've made, Choking Tethers for 3 colorless and 1 island. You get an instant. Tap up to 4 target creatures, cycling for 1 colorless and 1 blue. And cycling lets you draw a card. In this case, you discard this card, draw a card. And whenever you cycle Choking Tethers, you may tap a target creature. It's got tap and tap. This kind of aligns with what we talked about in a previous episode when you and I were talking about what's the card from your Fey Cube that mills 5 and or they can cycle it.
Compelling argument. Thank you.
Yeah. That kind of plays into this aspect too. I like that you're very deliberate in your card choices. Just because it's a small cube, you don't want it to be a generic cube necessarily. I guess that's the real takeaway from a travel cube. Is you want replayability. That's very important. You want people to keep shuffling and playing again, and you want the experience. What cycling and modality does provide to your environment. The first thing I see is every time I play this, that I'm going to get a different type of gameplay experience every time I do it because I can choose a different choice in my modality. And that's what I really like about your game choices here.
What's really nice about Choking Tethers as a card with that modality is that it is a defensive piece, it's an aggressive piece, you can use it to tap down certain problematic things, you can immediately use it just for the cycling, just to get through your cards. No matter what you do with Choking Tethers, you're going to end up ahead in that exchange because it is versatile, and it allows for interesting and engaging decision-making and plays to happen within this environment in a way that more, I'll say, diverse cubes get to have, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Another point, too, that I think is cool is, like, as a curator, and I run 360s, let's go off on a tangent for a matter that's kind of relevant. So the Ring Temp Shoe was something we're going to talk about, or we have talked about with Derek Gallen recently. And for me, my biggest problem with it is not that it's not really good. It came down to the density and the accessibility of certain cards. I just didn't want to add more elements right now. And one of the things we said, it wasn't even against the Ring Temp Shoe. It was just adding more layers of the onion, if you will, right? Adding more things to the card, more things for the people to learn in my environment. So I'm going to let it get play tested, etc. But what's interesting about such a small compartmentalized cube as a travel cube, and again, I want to reiterate, I'll include this in the show notes, for design for anybody who wants to pack and play and just get on an airplane and go play Cube and introduce people, is that your choices matter, but you can do smaller packages. Your density matters. Like at 360, I normally say, like as a creed, you should always hit 10% of a thing. I know that's not always possible. And we have talked about that it's okay to have shortcomings for signpost, but it is important that you have enough of something for people to grasp onto it. And the one that caught my eye in her TLDR is her lessons learned package. And this was a really small package. This was from Strixhaven, but I think that's really cool that with such a small cube that you can embrace a small mechanic, if you will, right? Would you mind telling the audience here, May, what you've chosen for lessons learned? Because I'm impressed that you ran this, and I love these cards.
The first one is Professor of Symbology. It is a 1 and a white for a 2/1 core cleric. When it enters the battlefield, learn. And what learn mechanics do is you may reveal a lesson card you own from outside the game, effectively a wish, and put it into your hand. Or, this is the modality aspect that I really like, not only is it a wish, or you can discard a card and draw a card. And since discarding is a major part of this environment, you actually have a choice here of, am I grabbing the lesson card that I might have drafted earlier, or am I going to draw and discard and then draw a card in order to enable some of my other graveyard strategies or discard synergies, whatever.
What I do like, and I hate to interrupt you, but what I like is the lesson portions, they're token-esque, right? They're almost like they're auxiliary pieces, but they're in the draft and they're main boardable on their own aspects. And one example that she has in here is environmental sciences for 2 colorless, sorcery, lesson, common. Search your library for a basic land card, reveal it, put it into your hand, then shuffle. You gain 2 life. There's nothing wrong with just doing that all by itself. You don't have to have the professor to get the environmental sciences. That's what I like about your choices. It's a splashable, colorless card that lets you do a thing, right? Also, what's really cool, too, is it has its own built-in intrinsic modality of, go get the card, go get the basic land. But also, life gain does matter because these are tight packages. And, as we talked about during our life gain episode with John Brostoff, every time you gain life, if you get 3 or more, that essentially equals an extra turn, which equals an extra card by the math. So
which
it's really
I'll
cool.
Also add that it has a particular matchup since, again, my travel cube is designed for 2 players. It is designed that you are competing against one person for cards directly. And when you see environmental sciences, one of the things that you can consider is my opponent drafting burn cards? Does this put me out of range for a lot of those burn cards? Does it help me get consistency to get to the late game after they've already teetered out all the resources?
You don't have to have a critical mass of this for this to be good. That's what I like about this concept.
Right.
And I like that you got to play such a small package. Again, this is from Strixhaven. And I remember when this came out, a lot of curators were kind of talking about whether or not they wanted to include this in their environment because of density purposes. And I probably would have leaned on the side of the fence and said no. But now that you've introduced me to a travel cube with such a small package, a small grouping, this is impressive. I'm a huge fan of what you've done here. We talked about this we do our pre-gaming as we do, and we were talking about late game bombs. Would you mind taking on this first one here? Because I've got some conflict with this first one. And I'll explain why.
This one is huge because it is a 2 white, blue Sphinx, 3/5 flying lifelink. Whenever you would draw a card, it gains +1/+0 until end of turn. Whenever it attacks, you may draw a card. Discard a card, and if you do, it gains hexproof until end of turn, and tap it. This card's really strong in this environment, obviously.
Yeah, it's really strong in a lot of environments. I think this card's oftentimes overlooked, and the art is absolutely gorgeous.
Oh, yeah.
And I do realize it's game ending, but the interesting part, this ties back into that web. If you guys have noticed during this episode, her choices are very meticulous, and it's a web that she's weaving. So that as you, the drafter, you don't have to get lost.
This card's hard to get out. Let me just put that out there.
Yeah,
in a lot of environments, when you have the fixing, you have the consistency, you have the density, you have options to get to the point where you can have 2 white, 2 blue at any given point. Dream Trawler is going to overexcel there. But in this environment, it's actively a challenge to get 2 white and 2 blue. Your resources and fixing are so overly contested with your opponent And not only that, your opponent's going to know if you take the Dream Trawler. Your opponent's going to know whether or not you're going to be able to cast that Dream Trawler. And playing around that card as this big late game threat of, if I can get to this point and I can stick this onto the board, then I can effectively win the game, and my opponent knowing that, they can draft around it. It adds complexity in a way that other cubes don't really get to take advantage of because of the small, compact nature of it. This card will come up 100% of the time, and both players need to either account for it or cut it out.
Yep, I agree. This is great. I love it. I love the choice. And you did declare it as late game bombs. I mean, it's not like a mystery. This card will kill you if you allow it to come out. But there's ways to equalize it. I like what you've done. I mean, I would take a Psychotog over this every day and get in there earlier. This is a late game play. 8 Colossus is another one you have in here. For 8 colorless mana, you got an artifact creature construct, 8/8. This spell costs 1 less to cast for each gate you control. We talked about your land base, your mana base was...
It's a lot of gates.
A lot of gates, right? Why not have a payoff, right? So you might get this out a little sooner than later, but it's dirtily, but it's really cool. And whenever a gate enters the battlefield under your control, you may put gate Colossus from your graveyard on top of your library. Huge fan of this card.
Oh yeah,
it's just
really
slow
good
enough and just game ending enough. But it doesn't have any evasion, doesn't have any trample. Just represents, well, excuse me, I'm going to change that actually. Gate Colossus can't be blocked by creatures powered 2 or less. Okay, so it does dwindle your forces. But You know what? Game's got to end. So I like this choice. I mean, shuffle up and play another one, right?
Yep.
Next one here, would you mind taking over this one? I love this late game bomb. This is sweet. I love this package you built.
Scion of Darkness is 5 black for a creature avatar that has trample, and it's a 6/6. Whenever it deals combat damage to a player, you may put target creature card from that player's graveyard onto the battlefield under your control, and it also has cycling 3. It is a reanimate target, it is big and scary if you can hardcast it, and if it connects, you can take advantage of your opponent's discards. Because your opponent's going to discard. That is the whole point of this cube. That situational part of, what if my opponent doesn't have a creature in their graveyard, can't exist in this environment. They're going to have things to hit. And this card adds that tension of, are you going to be able to hit the Scion of Darkness? And if you are, then what are you going to take?
And I like that you tied this package off, and there's a lot more added to this, but you said this is your hard-to-cast cards, your creature finishers.
Yep.
They may ask more than the other packages, but they are much harder to deal with. So your threats are real threats, but they have to earn their threats, and that's what I like about this whole idea. Your next grouping, you called it Stompy, but what she has done is she's chosen some kind of, we're going to call these are hybrid mana cards. But by the virtue of hybrid mana cards, they've created a sense of modality, as in they can be splashed. They blend into the other color schemes. Avatar of Discord and Daegmith the Titan. Would you mind taking these two on and explaining why you've added these 2 cards to your environment?
Sure. I will say that while these aren't the only Stompy cards, obviously, they are 2 major players into... It is a strategy that you can take when you're drafting this environment, and Avatar of Discord is Rakdos for a creature avatar with flying. It's a 5/3. When it comes into play, sacrifice it unless you discard 2 cards. And again, you're going to be discarding. You are going to be getting things in the graveyard. You're going to have madness triggers. You're going to have things that care about cycling cards being in the graveyard. You're going to have things that care about being in the graveyard. That is not a cost. That is not an issue. And when you have this big flyer that can come down for 3 mana, it can really put pressure on your opponent in a way that more diverse and available cubes don't really get to experience, because hybrid cards are important when you're building a travel cube. Artifacts are important. Hybrid cards are important. Things that fit into multiple decks. This is a Rakdos card. This is a mono black card. This is a mono red card. This fits into 3 major colors that you should care about. And when Avatar of Discord exists in the same environment as that Sphinx that we mentioned earlier, this comes down sooner. It has a bigger body. It can put down more damage sooner. And that relative cost is not really a cost when we have so many cards that take advantage of it. And it is important to realize that when we're building Stompy whatever, I want it to fit into as many different color combinations as we can, because your draft is going to change on one opponent. You have one person that you are trying to draft around.
I want to add some more. So, like, I'm looking through the list, right? And we've kind of laid the format, the style, the framework. It's discard, modality, blink, etc. We've kind of made the pillars of this cube. But there's some interesting, like, additional tie-ins that if you're going to be a curator building a modality cube or a travel cube, we're going to call it a modality cube for its purposes. It's very important, as May has stated, that every card matters. Choices have to matter. Blending within the decks have to matter. Cards have to coalesce together in order to pull off a deck, and so that your players have a good time. Define the fun is very important. Here's one that I think is really fascinating that ties off a lot of these ideas. Chainer, the Nightmare Adept. For 2 colorless and Rakdos, get a legendary creature, human minion, 3/2. Discard a card. You may cast a creature spell from your graveyard this turn. Activate only once each turn. I like that limitation. Keeps it right at the pacing you want. And whenever a non-token creature enters the battlefield under your control, if you didn't cast it from your hand, it gains haste until the end of turn.
Nasty.
That's nasty. But that really ties into, and I want to point out this next one here. This is this tie-in. I'm loving the web that you've woven here. Gore Clan Rampager. For 2 colorless and Gruul, get a creature beast, 4/4. Trample. Blood Rush. Gruul, discard Gore Clan Rampage. From basically target attacking creature gets +4/+4 and gains trample until end of the turn. You can see where you could pitch this card to a Psychotog or to something like Chainer and do the Blood Rush, do the Blood Rush first and then get the payoff later, or you see it's just so fascinating. Or do some kind of channel thing. Like, I just love the tie-ins you have here. I'm highly impressed with the options you provided in such a very small package. You've even, I want to talk about one more thing too. You kind of talked about this as the focus card in the beginning, hollowed one. And I noticed that you broke Singleton with that one. You wanted that one to be stressed. That card's such a high payoff. What was your reasons for doing that?
It is such an important card that I genuinely do not feel comfortable only having one hollow one in this environment. Having 2 in here is so important since it's designed for 2 players. If somebody isn't drafting hollow one, then what are you doing? Because this card is dangerous. The more that you discard, the more that you cycle, however you do it, however you take advantage of the rest of your things, this is a 4/4 regardless of your land, regardless of anything. You are getting a 4/4 creature. And ideally, if somebody's eating their vegetables, they're going to try to draft that hollow one.
I would totally agree with that. I can see the value in there. And then you're running something like really cool, like OG Masticore is another tie-in point. For 4 colorless artifact creature, it's a Masticore. At the beginning of your upkeep, you may choose and discard a card from your hand. If you don't, sacrifice Masticore. Then you can pay 2. Masticore deals 1 damage to target creature, or you can pay 2, regenerate Masticore. I love that card choice in here. It just really ties in. It's a tie that binds. You've got your colorless section is very deliberate. That kind of comes back to what you were saying. With the travel cube, with a very small amount of selections of cards, everything has to matter. Everything has to count. I see a few cards in here that are bomby. I do see some bombies, but we'll talk about that. Go ahead. What was your question?
I was just going to add that the thing about designing these micro cubes, these travel cubes, really, really tight, small environments is that every card is going to come up in your draft. 100%, there is absolutely no variation. And Masticore is an interesting case because, of course, it can slot into any combination of deck that you have and perform well, but it has really strong matchups against these cheap, aggressive decks. So remember how I said earlier where I have 3 different Savannah Lion variants, right? And knowing that I haven't seen these variants come up in this draft because I only have one person, I can take advantage of the cards that I know that have passed, cards that I've seen, cards that I'm not seeing. There is an element here that is more in depth than you would get from other drafting experiences because you are drafting against only one person instead of an entire pod. And part of this is that Masticore you can draft with the specific intention of answering some of these various 2/1, 1/1s, etc. Like I have Basking Rootwalla and Blazing Rootwalla in here, which are just the stupid little lizards with Madness 0, right? And Masticore completely shuts those down. And then, after you manage to stick your Masticore, shut down a lot of their early attackers, then your opponent looks back at their cards that they drafted and makes changes to their deck, adjusting to what you're playing.
So what's really cool is that about this package, about this travel cube environment, choices matter. That's kind of our final thoughts. Modality is significant. Hybrid cards really paint a picture for your drafters to be able to do that 3-color, 4-color splashing as they needed. Monocolor, as May stated, it's really hard to pull off just because your card pool is getting snagged by the two players facing off amongst each other. There's no choices, no opportunity. So you have to be really deliberate in your choices and plan ahead and get stuff like Birds of Paradise, Ornithopter Paradise. You need to get that fixing to tie those pieces together. And then the guild gates are going to really control the pacing of this cube environment. I'm really hype about this actually showing up at CubeCon. I would love to bring this into the bar cube the one evening, whichever evening that may be. There's so many evenings, right, May?
Mm-hmm.
But
I'll bring it.
I would love to see this just get busted out. Maybe we can pull off a 4-player version of the Monopoly Cube side by side with the Travel Cube, and then do the Bar Cube. And then, like we said, we really hope Andy brings out his really sweet unsleeved cube. It'd be badass. Best bar night ever. Other than that, do you have any final thoughts, May?
Yes, I have a few other final thoughts. So when it comes to designing this environment, one thing that you'll notice is these guild gates, as you mentioned. And the guild gates are not good fixing. They are not good dual lands. They are, quite frankly, the bottom of the barrel when it comes to fixing. And the reality is that you are forced into these. You don't get the choice of whether or not you want to run gates. You're running gates. What's interesting about how demanding it is for your land choices and for your fixing choices as opposed to a desert cube, where desert cube, you're drafting your lands, you know exactly how many lands are in the environment, how many are going to go around, and you have to draft whatever you're going to play. You don't get that here, but if you want to participate, if you want to draft into your things, you're going to end up in this position where, oh, I'm going to draft white. Oh, wait a second, there's not enough white cards. I literally cannot draft every single white card and end up with a playable white deck. And it forces you to play cards that you normally would shy away from, and it makes it more valuable because the type of environment that it's in. So I really wanted to take advantage of some of those gate payoffs and make it so that way you feel rewarded for picking up those gates, even though you are forced to partake in them.
I like that. Forced by choice. All right. Well, this has been really fun. I hope this is a good little primer for a travel cube. I think it's a neat idea. It's a cool concept, a cool pack and play type of concept that maybe a lot of people hadn't thought of. If you just want to put it into a small container, sleeved, unsleeved, double sleeved, whatever, and then just hop on the airplane, drive in the car, and go to an LGS, bust this out. It's a good way of introducing people to the fast play of Cube, or in this case, right, the dynamics of Cube. Other than that, we're going to move over to our socials. We've got an announcement. The Gathering Place is sponsoring a huge convention in Durham that we're excited to be a part of, and the UberCube will be featured on August the 19th and 20th, where on the 19th, I'll be launching a draft of UberCube's Artifact Cube, I believe at 2 p.m. on that Saturday, and then at 6 p.m., I'm going to be doing UberBear's Horror Cube, and then on Sunday at 1 p.m., I'm going to be doing UberBear's Two-Headed Giant Cube, where we're going to be doing prize support, and I really wanted to once again thank Stephen Conefall for his significant prize support that he sent that I'll be dishing out to the players, and it's going to be pretty sweet. I'm going to be hyping that up pretty hard because we're going to it's going to be a legacy modern 10K event, and I'm going to be pulling players over, and they're setting up a special place for me so that I can do some podcasting. And there's going to be it's pretty cool. There's a lot of celebrities going to be there, like Mana Curves and stuff like that. I saw in the announcement. So I'm going to see who I can pull into Cube, May. I'm going to get them over there and be like, I got some sweet packs provided by Steven. Get over here and let's compete so I can support 8, 8, and 8. It's going to be pretty cool. And then I'm going to record it all live with Stu. Pretty hype about that. And it's for the Extra Life Foundation, Duke Hospital. So we're really honored to be a part of that. Thank you, The Gathering Place, for including us in that. Also, May and I and Stu, Christian and Chris, and our good friend Bill will all be traveling to CubeCon. There'll be a whole bunch of dudes in a minivan. And then, May, you're partnering up with our good friend ChillMTG, correct? And you guys are cruising over your direction?
Yeah, we're going to be chilling over just because it's I happen to be on the way. So carpooling is good.
Out. We're all going. And then May, you're actually a part of one of the panels there, correct?
I am. It was Mind Twist, I'm pretty sure that the game was called, and I have no idea what it's about. I'm here for the ride.
I'm excited. Either way, we're gonna get you a sweet UberCube T-shirt. We gotta represent. All right, and then you may have noticed on our Buzzsprout we have a donate button that basically helps the show out. If you're interested in supporting the show, press that button. I'm working on how to refine that, but the gist is it helps us to actually breed creativity, get better people on the show, etc. You get the idea. Equipment, all the things. We just want to get bigger, badder, and faster. If you love the show, we would truly appreciate a 5-star review on your favorite player. This is really important, like going on to Apple iTunes or going on to Google and filling out a review. 5 stars would be appreciated. It really helps for people to see the podcast and to grow this. And another thing, too, that I'd like to call out for the audience, please share UberCube with your friend circle. We want everybody to hear this. We want more cubers. I mean, look at CubeCon and look at it last year versus this year. I think last year it was like 170 players. This year, we got a few tickets left. They were talking about like 120 the last time I checked. And that was within like the first day. 400 people are going to be showing up in Madison, Wisconsin. Strong chance. And I'd like to see that double next year. Cube is taking off really hard. May, do you have anything to add about that?
Tell us. Tell us about the Patreon.
Patreon. Yeah, tell us about the Patreon. So we do have a Patreon. And
it exists.
And you can find us at Twitter at UberCubeMTGPod. You can reach us at UberCubeMTGPodcast@gmail.com. And we have a Discord. And we would love our listeners to join the Discord. We've got some great personalities in there. May starts. She's the spearhead of most of the great conversations. I am extremely active on there. If you want to learn more about travel cubes, thematic builds, powered vintage, who cares? You want to talk about brewing? I'm currently brewing a sweet pale ale right now that I'm going to put some jalapeno spice in it soon. Anyways, join the Discord. The Discord is a great place just to talk about everything we got going on. Other than that, we're going to say the thing that we always say here at UberCube, and is
happy traveling.
Cube.
Wait.
Traveling Cube. Happy Cube.
Yeah. Nailed it.
Yeah. Nailed it.